Etwas Großartiges ist passiert, meine lieben Freunde. Etwas Großartiges ist passiert, Freunde, denn ein neuer Teil der Breath of the Wild in Minecraft Nachbauen-Reihe, das ist ein übelst beschissenes Wort, ist released worden. Noch nicht mal 24 Stunden ist es her, dass Teil 3 veröffentlicht wurde und Teil 1 und 2 haben wir uns bereits angeschaut und wir haben sie massiv genossen und jetzt ist es soweit. Wir haben ein weiteres Video, welches wir gemeinsam gucken können. Es wird eine kleine Reise, deswegen habe ich mir einen frischen Kaffee gemacht. Holt euch doch auch noch was zum Snacken oder zum Trinken und dann starten wir rein. Ich bin übertrieben hyped. Es wird richtig cool. Für die Credits wieder gemacht vom lieben Grazi. Ich hoffe, ich spreche ihn richtig aus. Der hat natürlich auch schon die letzten gemacht. Vor 16 Stunden erschienen ein Building All of Breath of the Wild in Minecraft. Zoras Domain ist heute dran. Teil 3. Freunde, auf geht's. Ich freue mich tierisch.
I am building all of Breath of the Wild in Minecraft, and yes, that really does mean every mountain, village, stable, everything. At the end of the last episode, we completed everything in this highlighted region of the map, and today I want to extend my reaches into the Lanayru region and complete some...
Ey, das ist schon wieder so viel, ne? Weil man vergisst ja immer, jetzt im Videotitel war jetzt quasi nur Zoras Domain, ne? Also sozusagen die Stadt, in der die Zoras leben, aber diese ganzen Berge und die Flüsse, Seen, Täler, alles, wie viel der immer in einer Folge macht, das ist gottlos.
Fan-favorite locations like Zora's Domain. And yes, that includes Vah Ruta, which will be the first divine beast we've completed in this series. First, I plan to move out east from Kakariko Village, completing Lanayru Promenade and Mount Lanayru. And Naedra the Dragon might be waiting atop the frozen peak. Then, I want to head back west to finish up the Lanayru Wetlands and the Lanayru Tower, of course, before building our way up the road to Zora's Domain. We will complete the domain and its surrounding region and finish off with Divine Beast Vah Ruta.
Krass.
Literally hundreds of hours of work was put.
Und das alles wieder in einem Video. Es ist so ein Fest. Ich habe vielleicht sogar noch kleine Insider-Infos, denn ein paar deutsche Minecraft-Entwickler, sage ich mal, haben sich mittlerweile mit ihm zusammengetan und einer davon, der ist auch im Hübcraft-Team mehr oder weniger dabei und der hat mir auch schon so Sneak Peeks gegeben, an was die mittlerweile arbeiten. Ich rede nur von funktionierenden Wächtern in BOTW, in Minecraft. Unglaublich. Ey, ich bin ultra hyped, Mann. Vielleicht krieg ich das auch noch selber an.
And not just by me, but you'll see about that later. So I really hope our hard work...
You see all about that later. Ich glaube, sein Team wächst. Und da sind auch Deutsche dabei. Und die kenne ich.
...has paid off and that you guys can enjoy this episode of Breath of the Wild in Minecraft.
So ein sympathischer Typ, Mann. Ich sag's euch, wie es ist.
Just east of Kakariko Village, on the way to Mount Lanayru, is Lanayru Promenade. A massive valley with large stone structures that time has not treated well. This was first up on the to-do list. Entering into the valley, I began to build up the first structures that would be in the promenade. The stone in this region was a lot lighter.
Fun Fact, sobald du Shader auf Minecraft packst, sieht es einfach aus wie die krasseste Grafikbombe aller Zeiten, obwohl es nur verdammte Shader sind.
Than any of the other structures that I encountered thus far in the project. I settled on a block palette of mostly sandstone, but also with a bit of endstone and other lighter blocks sprinkled throughout. I built up the first few towers and this large structure which would be copied and pasted all around the valley.
Das ist auch mal geil, ne? Dass er so viel copy und pasten kann, dass eigentlich so viele Strukturen in Breath of the Wild sich doppeln, aber dadurch, dass es einfach so gut alles zusammengepackt wurde, fällt einem das beim Zocken einfach nicht auf.
Through the promenade. This was a very winding path, so I kinda had to wait until I got a lot of the structures down before I could begin to place it. Around the middle of the valley was this cluster of smaller structures, right around the area where the path dips below the water. And beside it was another one of these.
Genau, da hat es wieder reingecopy-pasted.
I then brought the path all the way through the rest of the valley and began to mark out where some of the other.
Krass, wie er einfach einmal so diesen kompletten Weg durchzieht. Das sieht so cool aus in der Timelapse.
Working in a sort of backwards order, I started from the other end of the valley and began making my way towards the center from there. A lot of these structures were pasted in from what I've already built. But this eventually led up to the small cave where the path sort of folds in on itself and crosses over the valley.
Sehr geil. Ist nicht in der Gegend, die er jetzt gerade baut, auch noch ein Schrein hinter einem Wasserfall? Da war doch irgendwas.
With that, the entire northern side of the valley was finished, and I moved over to the other side of the river to begin work. This was a mixture of pasting in structures that I had already built, but also redesigning the same ones at a different angle. And speaking of different angles, I'm sure you've seen from these clips that a lot of these structures are at some odd angles. This was really good practice for me, getting to work some more on these odd angles.
Ja, genau, den Weg, den er jetzt baut. Genau der Weg, der führt nämlich hinter dem Wasserfall und da ist dann ein Schrein drin, weil da habe ich auch noch ganz böse Erinnerungen an Kaizo BOTW, also an Relics of the Past. Boah, war das ätzend.
Little did I know at this point that the promenade was just prepping me for the hell that was going to be Zora's domain. But now we're finishing up the promenade. I did put the shrine behind the waterfall with the little cave and added in some of the finishing touches, which were mostly just giant vines made of leaves.
Das Gute ist an der Stelle, er hatte quasi die Map durch so ein Programm erstellen lassen, wo er quasi die Map von Breath of the Wild reingepackt hat und der hat dann automatisch die Höhen berechnet. Und allein quasi durch diese Berge und der Fluss, der sich dadurch windet, ist ja quasi ein Großteil dieser Gegend schon gebaut und er muss quasi nur noch diese Ruinen noch zusätzlich reinsetzen. Also er muss ja kaum Terraforming betreiben. Deswegen schafft man hier, glaube ich, in verhältnismäßig kurzer Zeit eine große Fläche der Map.
Finishing touch. Moving on from the promenade, just past this valley is Mount Lanayru.
Ist schon fertig,
the mountain that the Spring of Wisdom sits atop. I had to do a lot of touching up to the landscape.
Genau, und jetzt macht er sehr viel Terraforming.
Most notably changing the snow levels to match the style for the rest of the map that I've completed. And I also had to add in a bunch of the spruce trees around this area.
Und das ist auch cool, das haben wir schon in den ersten beiden Episoden gesehen. Wie gesagt, auf die habe ich auch reagiert, schaut euch das gerne an. Er hatte sich ja ganz viele Sachen schon vorgebaut. Er hat ja einen Schrein einmal gebaut, den er copy-pastet. Er hat sich Bäume selber gebaut, die er copy-pastet. Entweder nicht die Originalen, die quasi Minecraft hat. Und wenn das alles einmal gemacht ist, dann kann man das natürlich immer wieder verwenden. Und dadurch wird das Terraforming natürlich unfassbar viel schneller.
Has a lot of these unique giant crystals sprinkled all across it. So since there was almost no structures or anything to build in this area, I got to work on these. I tried some different methods and styles for these crystals, as you can see here, but ultimately to match the style of the games, I went for these sort of blocky designs, as you can see me building up here, and meshed them together a bunch to make them seem more unique. After I made a few templates for different crystals, I began to paste them all across the mountain, most notably at the top, where there is an unusual amount of them.
Weil es so mächtig ist und groß. So
and of course, as I'm sure you all know, atop the mountain is the Spring of Wisdom. This was another build that was at a sort of odd angle, but it was so small that it really didn't matter. The goddess statue looks a bit odd at this angle, but honestly, I think it looks good. However, there's a special guest atop Mount Lanayru. When you first climb this mountain in Breath of the Wild, you find Naydra the dragon corrupted by Calamity Ganon's malice. I decided that I wanted to have Naydra built atop the mountain covered in malice just like in game. The problem is I'm really bad at building dragons. I've tried before on a few different occasions and I can never make it look right. Fortunately though, around this time I saw some impressive Breath of the Wild builds in my Discord server.
Oha, er fängt jetzt an, sich eine riesige Community aufzubauen, die ihm hilft. Wie episch!
Which, by the way, if you want to join my Discord server, link in the description, you should come hang out. However, when I saw his design for Dinral, I knew I needed this guy's help.
Oh mein Gott, sieht das gut aus. Holy moly.
I reached out to him for help on Naydra, and he accepted. So, welcome our second builder to the project, Hyrath. Hyrath quickly got to work, draping the dragon across the mountaintop, winding in and out of the giant crystals. He also was able to pick out a pretty good block palette for the purple crystals and the malice.
Da bin ich so gespannt, wie er die Malice macht, ne? Quasi diese Verseuchung.
Thankful for. I was not looking forward to figuring out what to use for malice. The head was constructed pretty smoothly with some purple crystals added around the back of the neck. And before long, Hyrath was going through putting in all of the giant malice eyes that were sprawled across the body. I think there's 4 in total. In the end, Naydra turned out very nice, and I am really thankful for him because I'm not that good at dragons. Believe me, I've tried before.
Krass. Also man muss, sag ich mal, schon wissen, dass es ein Drache ist, der sich da rumschlängelt. Ich glaube, wenn jetzt jemandem sagen würde, hey, so, du hast keine Ahnung, was es ist, was stellt das dar, ist es, glaube ich, schwer zu erkennen, dass es ein Drache ist, auf dem lila, schwarzer Schleim sitzt mit Augen. Aber wenn man weiß, was es ist es verdammt beeindruckend.
In this final epic screenshot, you can also see that the giant crystals were made to be more white than blue, mostly to make the dragon easier to see.
Epic. Krass, dass sie den... Er hätte auch einfach sagen können, yo, ich nehme die Map-Version, wo der Drache quasi schon befreit wurde und alles ist gut. Aber er hat sich gesagt, nein, ich will, dass es geil aussieht. Und hat epic. Ey, richtig, richtig gut.
Lanayru done, we can move over to the Lanayru wetlands to begin work on this swampy region. And this is where I began to acquire more help with the project. I'll spare you guys from the massive story, but basically a bunch of my friends ended up having access to the Breath of the Wild map. I added some of them to a server just so that they could look around and experience it. But then a lot of them ended up wanting to stay and help me with the project, and I was okay with that. So I had quite a few friends who are now logging on with me to follow along with.
Krass, ey, so geil zu sehen, wie dieses Projekt jetzt so organisch wächst und immer mehr Leute mitmachen wollen. Und einfach jeder davon investiert einfach super viel Freizeit.
Whatever I was doing and help adding in a lot of the smaller details. All of them who helped me will be credited down in the description. Seriously, without their help, this video could have very well taken a couple extra months to complete. Moving on, I'm sure you saw that in the background we began work on the Lanayru wetlands, adding in some birch trees with drip leaf and lily pads to make it feel more swampy. There were a lot of wooden ruins across these islands, and Olmbrains turned out to be really good at putting in a lot of the small details here.
Hier sieht man einfach mal wieder, dass die BOTW-Map gar nicht, in vielen Punkten, ne, gar nicht so krass detailreich ist, sag ich mal. Und das macht es halt für so einen Minecraft-Nachbau sehr angenehm, weil du hast nicht überall so super viele kleine Details, an denen du arbeiten musst, und du kannst teilweise richtig große Flächen in verhältnismäßig kurzer Arbeitszeit abhandeln.
I was slacking a bit with these ruins, so I went back and added a bunch of smaller details to mine.
Da ist ja so ein Wächter laufen da vorne, den sie platziert haben.
On the east side of the wetlands was the massive Lizalfos camp that spread across the river. We all got to work on this part of the project. Pretty much everyone contributed to this one in some way. I began to build up some of the bone structures while Cherry worked on one of the entrance gates, and we all went through each other's work to edit it slightly and make sure everything was as it should be. This was also one of the first times I got to use mud brick as a mixture with jungle planks. I would eventually try this block mixture on the Divine Beast as well,
wie cool
but
das
as you'll see, it
aussieht.
doesn't work out too well over there. A lot of the structures in this camp were identical to each other, so after we finished up the first main part, we were able to just paste it around to the other two spots.
Oh, schaut mal! Da unten in der Ecke haben sie jetzt sogar einen Exalfos hingepackt. Aus Diamantblöcken, glaube ich, nicht, dass ich richtig sehe. Der sogar gerade seine Zunge rausstreckt. Ey, wie cool.
Next to the camp is the Lanayru Tower, which is the one with all of the bones sticking out of the ground around it. I began working on these bones, but for some reason, I had it in my mind that the bones needed to be 1 block wide. It was like 3 a.m., I wasn't thinking straight, so they were turning out really bad at first. But the next morning, I did some editing to them, and I came out with some structures that are a lot better. Meanwhile, Olmbrains got to work on some of the area down beneath the tower, near the small ponds where the dead guardian is. Finally, I began to paste in a bunch of the bone structures that me and Ezio had created, covering the entire region with them. We also added a lot of the smaller structures, as there were a lot of little...
beeindruckend. Wie gesagt, wir sehen das ja alles in unfassbarer Timelapse. All das, was wir jetzt hier so in wenigen Minuten zusammengeschnitten bekommen haben, hat einfach Stunden um Stunden gedauert. Es ist insane.
Platforms with rocks on them hanging off the cliff, as well as a giant bokoblin tree camp, which I pasted in as we built it in the last episode. Now that we passed by the Lanayru Tower, we are officially on the road to Zora's domain. The start of this path marked by an Inogo Bridge just beneath the tower. This bridge was going to be an important build because it meant we had to decide on a block palette for the Zora region.
Ja, und genau das er sagt, wollte ich jetzt gerade sagen. Ich bin gespannt, welche Farben sie nehmen. Also ich meine, so Diamantblock wäre so der erste Gedanke, aber man kann ja auch nicht alles aus Diamantblöcken machen. Ich bin sehr gespannt, welche Farben sie für die Zora-Gebäude nehmen und welche Blöcke.
Me and Olmbrains ended up settling for a mostly prismarine block palette, but we would also sprinkle in some other dark blue blocks, as you can see me messing with on the bridge, but I'll get more into the block palette when we reach the domain. For some reason, I was really struggling with the design of the bridge at first.
Man sieht, wie häufig er die Farben und Blöcke ändert.
And meanwhile, Olmbrains built the tower that you first meet Sidon under.
Ey, wie geil.
Off camera, we ended up pasting it to the other side since they're just duplicates of each other. The Zora region, however, presented a unique problem. The color of the cliffs in this region of the map is a lot different from anywhere else. It's almost a bit darker and has a lot of blue in it. I had a hard time picking out a block palette that I liked for this region, but once my friends joined, I was able to get some second opinions. I was just going for a darker gray, but they told me there was a lot more blue in the cliffs than I could see, because I'm colorblind, I guess. So we ended up settling with this huge block palette with all sorts of gray blocks, but also some blue. We quickly implemented this block palette across the entire Zora region. Ezio, Ombrains, and I got to work on the road to Zora's domain, adding in all sorts of small details and doing little bits of terraforming here and there. On the path that overlooked the river, there was almost cavernous parts of the path with lots of overhanging rocks and a small Lizalfos camp. We added in all of these details and combed through the forest to try and make sure that we didn't miss anything small. Further along, there were more parts of the path that had a lot of rocky overhangs. Ombrains did a really good job going through these rocky areas and adding all sorts of minute additions in the forms of stairs and slabs.
Ich muss einfach nur mal ganz kurz sagen, wie glücklich ich gerade einfach bin, mit euch dieses Video schauen zu können. Es ist so faszinierend.
Further along, we come to another bridge, which was the same design as the one we had built previously, so we just had to paste it in.
Ey, diese Farbpalette von den Zora-Gebäuden sieht so gut aus. Es sind so ganz viele unterschiedliche Blau-Türkis-Töne mit ein bisschen Weiß noch. Ich weiß nicht, ob das die Marmorblöcke sind oder andere, gar nicht sicher. Ich bin in der Blockpalette von Minecraft nicht so drin, aber es sieht so gut aus.
But we ended up having to change a little bit to accommodate the different angle. Further up the hill, we came to another bridge, which again was the same design as the one we've already built. I pasted in the bridge and began to edit it to change its angle, while Ghostly, Ezio, and Ombrains added in a lot of the smaller camps and rock formations along the path. Now, I'm sure you've noticed before that the Zora region has a lot of these giant overhanging rocks with dark blue tips. These didn't generate when I made the map, which meant that I would have to make them manually to mark out where they would all go.
Oh, und schaut mal da oben. Die haben da einfach einen riesigen Prinz Sidon hingemacht. So, einfach mal so casual gebaut. So, oh ja, wir importieren sie einfach mal so einen riesigen Prinz Sidon. So. Ich meine, der passt natürlich gar nicht in die Größenverhältnisse, aber so für den Flex. Ja, aber natürlich super ätzend, ne, was du gerade gesagt hast, dass diese blauen Steine, diese ganzen, ich weiß nicht, was sind das so, das sind ja, können ja keine Saphire sein, die wären ja viel zu groß, die wären ja alle reich in Hyrule. Aber die wurden halt nicht bei dieser Map-Erstellung sozusagen übernommen. Das heißt, du musst jetzt alle händisch einfügen.
I used giant balls of sandstone to make the basic structures. I placed these all across the valley, but obviously I'm gonna need some heavy terraforming to make these look natural. Doing it completely by hand was taking way too long, so I ended up learning how to use Voxel Sniper to speed up the process a little bit. Ghostly had already made a bunch of these rocks completely by hand, but using Voxel Sniper, I was able to heavily speed up the process.
Okay, er scheint jetzt irgendeinen neuen Mod oder irgendein neues Tool, Voxel Sniper, zu nutzen. Könnt ihr gerne mal in die Kommentare schreiben, was das ist, was das genau macht. Aber mit diesem Tool muss wohl das Terraforming deutlich einfacher sein.
I still had to do some manual work to the cliffs to make them look completely natural, but Voxel Sniper's smoothing commands were a huge help. While I was doing this, Ombrains continued along the path to add in a bunch of the camps and other structures along it, including this natural bridge which leads up to the domain, and Rallis Pond, which has long been home to a Hinox of High-Wrath design.
Geil!
Finally, to finish off the road to Zora's domain, I changed all of the sandstone structures to match the stony cliffs.
Wie geil sieht bitte einfach nur diese Übersicht aus, ne? Du siehst so oben links, siehst du so diesen Hinox mit dem kleinen Teich. Dann siehst du überall so kleine Bockblindlage. Du siehst überall diese blauen Smaragde oder diese blauen Kristalle, die aus der Erde rausschauen. Mit der Brücke. Allein dieses Bild, es sieht so stark aus. Und Zora's Domain fehlt dann auch. Das ist dieser riesige Grasfleck.
In the end, I think this valley looks incredible with shaders on.
Ja. Es sieht krass aus. Es sieht unfassbar aus.
But now, with the long road finished, we can finally move on to the fan favorite, Zora's Domain. I began construction on the domain, completely oblivious to the hell that this building process would become. As I fix up the terrain and put in the lake, I'm sure you can see that the domain is at a very odd angle. A 24-degree angle, to be exact. This brought up an interesting problem as the domain needed to be symmetrical, but because of the angle, I couldn't just copy-paste one side to the other. Each side would have to be differently shaped from the other, except it still had to look symmetrical.
Oh mein Gott. Nochmal für alle, die es nicht ganz verstanden haben. Aufgrund der Art und Weise, wie quasi Zora's Domain im Originalspiel platziert ist, ist das nicht quasi, das ist nicht rechtwinklig platziert, ne? Es ist in dem Winkel platziert. Und dadurch, dass halt Minecraft sozusagen aus Blöcken besteht und dementsprechend nur rechtwinklige Blöcke hat, dass sozusagen aber die Zora's Domain schräg gebaut werden muss, kann er nicht einfach copy-pasten, weil es ist nicht symmetrisch. Das heißt, er muss jeden einzelnen Turm, obwohl sie gleich aussehen, eigenhändig bauen, weil durch die verschiedenen Winkel muss jeder Turm anders aussehen, damit es in dieser Blockwelt natürlich aussieht. Übertrieben Krebs. Holy shit.
And if you don't understand what I mean by that, I have a little demonstration for you.
Okay, jetzt kriegt es nochmal erklärt von ihm.
See here, when the center of our build, or the line of symmetry, is completely straight, all we have to do is reflect our shape across the line, and it looks symmetrical.
So sieht's aus, wenn man es einfach copy-pasten kann, wenn es symmetrisch ist.
But when the line of symmetry is at an angle like this, we can't just use the same structure. One side.
Und jetzt seht ihr, so würde es aussehen, wenn man es copy-pastet. Aber es ist natürlich offensichtlich falsch.
Side of the structure has to be differently shaped while still looking symmetrical. This first attempt at the domain, I used the islands below to mark out the size of it, but you might be able to tell that it's a bit small, so we do end up scaling it up soon. I pasted in the bridge, which again is the same design from earlier, but this bridge was slightly different as it had a bunch of archways across its entire length that Ownbrains put in place. However, we didn't get much farther into the building process before we noticed the issue with the scale and decided to change it. I moved this version of the domain out of the way and began construction of a larger one. As I mentioned earlier, I used the islands below to figure out the scale for the domain, but for the second attempt I decided to ignore the islands and just change them up later to match the domain above. Once a lot of the outline was finished, I began work on these outer towers in the bridge.
Man sieht hier so krass, wie so große Minecraft-Builds gemacht werden, ne? Das ist wie, wenn man ein Bild zeichnet. Du musst erstmal einfach ganz viele Linien skizzieren, Formen anzeichnen, bevor du anfängst zu bauen. Und ich glaube, das unterscheidet einen guten Bilder in Minecraft von so einem Trottel wie mir. Also wenn ich sowas bauen müsste, ich würde halt irgendwie einfach anfangen und keine Ahnung. Und einfach mal, ich weiß es nicht, ich könnte es nicht mal sagen, wie ich es machen würde, aber es ist halt wichtig, sich alles anzuskizzieren, alles anzuzeichnen, damit man überhaupt mal eine Vorstellung hat, wie groß das Ganze wird.
Bridges that connect them. These were so painful to build because of the symmetry issue I mentioned earlier. We continued to structure the domain, finishing up the little platform that the entrance bridge connects to, and crafting completed bridges along the squiggly lines. As we kept adding to the domain, you can start to see the block palette that we chose more in depth. We chose a lot of prismarine and dark blue blocks with a splash of quartz as well. It's not all entirely accurate to the color of the domain, but prismarine was definitely the right choice, I think, since the prismarine blocks were designed for ocean monuments anyways. Once a lot of the main plaza was done, Ownbrains got to work on the shop and the inn on either side of the shrine room, but the shrine room would have to wait till later. Ownbrains finished up the inn first on the left side.
Das ist glaube ich, das ist das Hotel. Beziehungsweise das, mit Shader sieht das so schön aus.
Before moving over to the
Und
right,
da kommt der
where
Shop
the main
rein,
shop
ne?
was.
Ja.
She was also responsible for building the Mipha statue in the main plaza, and considering the scale, I think she did an amazing job.
Geil. Das ist einfach eine Statue, ne? Das ist einfach die Mipha-Statue. Alter, würde mir einer sagen, bau eine Mipha-Statue in Minecraft. So, vor allem, die ist ja nur so, ich weiß gar nicht, wie hoch ist die denn das? 6 Block? 6 Block hoch. Bau mal eine, in Anführungszeichen, menschliche Statue in Minecraft, die nur 6 Blöcke hoch sein darf. Du hast ja gar keinen Platz für Details.
Meanwhile, I was working up above on the king's throne room. This single building on its own took up most of the time working on the domain, especially considering I had to restart it on a couple different occasions.
Oh mein Gott, musste es immer wieder neu
Attempt
anfangen.
1, I was building on the 24-degree axis, and it was just a real pain to try to measure everything out and get all the pillars in the right spot at the weird angle. It was not going very well, and at this point, all of us builders were starting to get burnt out of the domain, as we were all finding it extremely difficult to build at the weird angle. So after my first attempt, finishing only part of the throne room and the Zora's sleeping quarters below, we took a break.
Keiner des Bauteams hatte mehr Bock. Jeder so, Alter, Zora's Domain, übel beschissen. Lass nicht mehr bauen.
5 days later, I came back with a new idea.
5 Tage
back
später.
In part 1 when I built the Great Plateau walls normally and then used World Edit to rotate them at the angle I needed? I decided to try out the exact same strategy with the throne room. Pretty much all of my confidence came back when I started building on the regular axis, and progress slowly began to speed up again. Keep in mind that a lot of these clips you're seeing are hours upon hours of work condensed down into a few minutes. I think the domain alone took anywhere from 30 to 50 hours to complete.
Ach du Scheiße. 30 bis 50 Stunden. Das ist mehr als eine komplette Arbeitswoche eines normal Arbeitenden. Freiwillig. Um ein Gebäude nachzubauen in Minecraft. Holy shit. Ey, ich sag's euch, das ist Passion. Das ist einfach nur Passion für ein Projekt.
After the Zora sleeping area was finished below, I moved back up to complete the throne room above. However, I realized when I started on the throne room that it was too big, so everything you just saw me do, I had to restart and remake on a smaller scale. But once the sleeping quarters were rebuilt, I resumed work on the throne room. Because I was building on the regular axis, I was able to just build one side of the throne and paste it to the other, before I built up the entrance gate outside. I went back in to finish the dome roof and extend the throne up across the ceiling. Back outside, it was time to finish the exterior of the throne room. I'm sure you guys all know that the outside is structured like a giant fish.
Ja,
I expected
quasi auf dem Hauptgebäude von Zora's Domain ist ja dieser riesige Fisch, der so halbmondförmig sozusagen da oben drauf sitzt. Ist nicht ganz oben sogar, ich glaube ganz oben ist sogar ein Croc drauf.
this to be a long, grueling process, but it actually wasn't. Building the fish on the regular axis was quite a breeze and actually really fun. I was worried at first that the fish wouldn't look right on this massive dome, but no, it actually turned out pretty good in my opinion. After its basic structure was done, I then played around with the block palette, struggling for a while to figure out what blocks I wanted to use where. But of course, since the domain's at a 24-degree angle, I had to use /rotate, which never works perfectly.
So, und das ist jetzt nochmal ganz wichtig für alle, die jetzt nicht verstanden haben, was er jetzt gemacht hat. Also er hat jetzt quasi, wir haben ja vorhin dieses Winkelproblem besprochen, und alles, was er jetzt gebaut hat, hat er quasi quasi in einem normalen rechten Winkel gemacht. Also er hat das Ganze jetzt quasi ohne Abwinkeln oder Anwinkeln gebaut und nutzt jetzt quasi ein Tool, ein Rotate-Tool, was das quasi automatisch dreht und berechnet. Das hat er nämlich beim großen Plateau schon mal gemacht, daher hatte er die Idee. So, aber das Problem ist bei diesem Drehen, das wird nie 100% akkurat berechnet. Das heißt, er muss jetzt wahrscheinlich super manuell ganz, ganz viel Hand anlegen und diese ganzen Fehler, die beim Rotieren passieren, selber auskorrigieren.
As you can see, when I rotated it all, it turned into a complete mess. There were just giant holes in it. The whole design was screwed up and we had to spend a few hours fixing it up. But I still think the way we did it was the way to go. If we were building it all at the 24-degree axis, I would have gone insane, let's be real. The main staircase going up to the throne room was also a pain because of the angle. It's not destined to look good, okay? It's not gonna be very functional, just please forget about it. One of the last few structures I needed to do was the shrine room. This room did not take nearly as long as the throne room, and I really like the design that I was able to come up with.
Sehr geil. Sehr, sehr, sehr fresh.
Back outside, there were a couple towers remaining on either side of the throne room.
Genau, das sind die ganzen Gänge noch außenrum.
Back to the mainland behind the domain. And I really gotta thank the game designers who worked on this part of the map, because you bet these bridges were the exact same design that I already built earlier. Finally, I went back down underneath the domain to connect it up to the land below, as Ezio had already terraformed the islands to properly connect up. Last but certainly not least, I began to work on the massive outer circle that surrounds the domain. This final part of the building process is what brought the whole thing together and made it look 20 times more amazing. At first, I kinda struggled to get some of the proper designs down, but eventually I found something that I liked and settled on it, before I began to gently curve it to make the circle formation. I only had to build 1/8 of the circle, since I could just use that and copy and paste it all around the rest. And finally, to end off this very painful part of the project, I did just that and began to paste it all around the circle, making for one of my favorite builds I've ever worked on, period.
wie das jetzt einfach nur mal durch die ganze runde Wand einfach viel heftiger aussieht. Holy shit, ist das krass. Oh mein Gott.
The area surrounding the domain still needed to be finished though. There's a massive waterfall directly behind.
Das hat alles geändert. Davor war so, ja, man erkennt so einzelne Aspekte und einfach nur durch diese große runde Wand da drunter wirkt es einfach wie eine richtig massive Burg. Oha. Da freue ich mich, wenn wir am Ende nochmal vielleicht so ein bisschen, da kriegt man immer so cinematische Aufnahmen. Da bin ich gespannt drauf.
Lots of smaller ones that climb Ploymus Mountain.
Genau, jetzt kommen diese riesigen Wasserfälle. Geil.
Paste in a previous build and change its angle.
Jetzt kann er wieder mit relativ wenig Aufwand riesige Bauten erschaffen. Ne, davor, das meint ja, er hat an super vielen kleinen Details feilen müssen, die man kaum sieht, einfach weil es durch den Winkel so super schwer ist. Ja, und jetzt kann er einfach wieder innerhalb kürzester Zeit einfach riesige Wasserfälle bauen, was da einfach wieder so geil aussieht mit wenig Arbeitsaufwand.
Just like the road to the domain, this area has lots of large rocks sticking out of the cliffs. I used the same strategy with giant chunks of sandstone to mark out the base structure before using Voxel Sniper smooth commands and some manual terraforming. I again changed all the sandstone to match the cliffs with the spots of blue, but of course I forgot to press record when I did that. After putting in a shrine or two and some ruins atop the mountains, I put in all of the tall grass, ferns and flowers along the cliffs.
Geil. Es sieht so beeindruckend aus. Ich dreh
Pretty
wohl.
much all that's left is Divine Beast Vah Ruta. Over in the East Reservoir Lake is where I plan to build the Divine Beast. So let's quickly finish up the lake before we get started on it. I set up a big
nochmal ganz kurz jetzt den Stausee quasi fertig machen, dass wir dann Vah Ruta reinsetzen können.
Plateau to mark the bottom of the lake, and got to work on the docks that surround the region. Ghostly already built most of the main dam, so I was able to edit the dock from his build and paste it all around to get the docks in place. On the opposite side of the lake is another version of the dam, so I pasted in the entire structure there and terraformed the outer regions. I then began to edit the bottom of the lake, changing it all to stone and putting in the water. To finish off the preparations for the Divine Beast, I once again began to mark out the large rock formations sticking out of the cliffs. Me and Ghostly worked together to do all of these cliffs in a single sitting.
Irgendwie wird es jetzt durch Minecraft mir erst wieder klar, wie schön Breath of the Wild einfach ist.
Now it's time to start work on the first Divine Beast of the entire project. Starting from the foot of the Divine Beast, I began to make my way upwards.
Ich bin so
These
gespannt.
early stages of the building process were a little difficult as I was really worried about getting the scale right. My main worry was that if I made it too small, I wouldn't have enough room to build the interior. There were a few times during these early clips where I contemplated starting over to make it larger, but I kept what I had and that ended up being the right decision. As you can see, I continued making my way up the side of the Divine Beast, which was honestly kind of a breeze. It started to get tough near the top though, as the design was more complex, and it was hard to find close-up reference pictures of this area of the beast. Nevertheless, I made it work and moved over to the back, where I built a large circular room with a dome-like roof.
Auch hier wieder, ich glaube, dass Vah Ruta ja wahrscheinlich wieder symmetrisch ist. Sprich, er muss nur eine Hälfte bauen und kann es dann copy-pasten. Genau, und da hinten in dieser Kuppel, da ist ja dann der Kampf gegen den Fluch.
To lay out the head, which proved to be the first truly difficult part of the build. After a couple attempts, I decided to make the head more spherical, planning to properly edit the shape of it as I went. After the first few attempts, I finally had a finished draft, and I thought that it was pretty nice. So, in preparation for the head, I decided to edit the scale of the Divine Beast's body. It looked too tall for how long it was, so I mainly edited its length, but also did shorten it by a small amount. I realized, however, that the head I had made was too small, so I started over on a larger scale. This time, Ombrains joined in to help me, giving the eye a much better design and helping me with the details on the ear.
Elefanten sind aber einfach unglaublich geil, mächtig aussehende Tiere, ne? Das muss man einfach mal sagen.
Once this design was finished, I put it in place and began to stitch the body into it before I began work on the trunk.
Wie krass
it was a little
das
tricky
aussieht.
to get its attachment right where it went onto the head, but it worked out in the end. After that, I put in the little antenna beside its head, which later helps to focus the blast at Hyrule Castle. After pasting the whole design onto the other side, I began to edit it a little bit.
Genau, und jetzt, das wollte ich nämlich gerade noch sagen, der leuchtet ja auch so. Aber da hat jetzt, glaube ich, ist das Lava? Sind das Lavablöcke oder ist das was anderes? Ich bin mir jetzt gar nicht sicher.
This side of the Divine Beast, which has the entrance to the inside, has a slightly different design. So I quickly fixed that up before moving in to try the interior.
Ach, der baut noch
the
alles
interior is
innen.
a little bit cluttered and hard to follow, but we did have enough room for it.
Krass. Ich dachte, das wäre, also, ich meine, er hat vorhin schon gesagt, dass das Interieur baut, aber dass er sich halt wirklich so ganz detailreich dran halten will, finde ich heftig.
There was really only one room where I felt like I was...
Er hätte es doch einfach geschlossen lassen können und einfach so, ja, man kann es angucken. Aber nein, er baut es. Er geht immer noch diesen Extraschritt und das ist so beeindruckend.
Trying to cram anything in place. But apart from that, it was actually very smooth. Omraid's also joined me again to help with some parts of the interior. But I'll let you guys truly explore it when the world download eventually comes out. Moving back outside, I moved the Divine Beast into its proper location, and added the water spout coming out of its trunk using stained glass.
Krass. Krass. Heftig.
And with that, Divine Beast Vah-Ruta is finished.
Oh, jetzt kommt wieder... Ja, jetzt kommt wieder der cinematische Teil. Heftig. All das in einem Video. Wie viel Content wir hier geliefert bekommen. Es ist insanely beeindruckend. Und vergisst teilweise, was alles nur in dieser einen Folge gemacht wurde. Das sieht so krass aus. Das sieht so krass aus. Ich dreh durch. Wie groß das einfach ist. Wie groß. Da unten noch mit Vah-Ruta in der Ecke, na. Macht das einfach mal, Freunde. Macht das einfach mal so. Komm, baus halt.
And so, another episode of Breath of the Wild in Minecraft.
Wir kriegen sogar noch einen richtig hochwertigen Screenshot. Wie geil. Oh, sieht das stark aus.
Has passed. As you can see, I have learned how to make insane renders for this project, and these are some of the renders I've made thus far. I tried to make one of the entire map, but as it turns out, rendering 335,000 chunks at the same time is not a good idea for my PC. But with all that out of the way, it brings us to the end of part 3, and I can finally go take a break. We have put so much time into this episode to get it out for you guys as soon as possible. So seriously, thank you to all my friends who have helped with this project. Again, they're all linked in the description. You should go check them out. Because without them, this video would probably be delayed until January. So make sure you guys all subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. And remember that Howziki is still working on a Breath of the Wild data pack that will be implemented into my map. So you can go check him out in the description below to see his part of the project. I hope you guys all enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.
Geil. Einfach nur stark. Und ich verlinke euch jetzt hier noch Part 1 und Part 2, falls ihr die noch nicht gesehen haben solltet mit meiner Reaction. Vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen. Danke an meine Kanalmember für euren dicken Support. Und Grazzy, Big Props.